Welcome to the latest edition of the Paddock Pass Podcast, closed by Fly Racing. And gents, did you know that Rental not only have a selection of carefully crafted handlebars for your road bike, used by the likes of Jonathan Rea and Alex Lowe's in World Superbikes, so they must be good, but also street grips. From comfort to durability to grip diameter options, Rental Streets have a grip for everybody. My name is Adam Wheeler. I'm joined by the man with the hat, Mr. David Emmett. He of deep analysis on motomatters.com. Read it, sign up to exclusive content from Patreon. I believe you're going to be having some more interviews over the next couple of weeks, Dave. Is that right?
That's correct. I've got a whole bunch ready to go. Well, ready for me to type up if I ever find a spare moment. And some very good ones with Joan Mir and with Santi Hernandez. So they were really interesting conversations.
As per usual, also on the podcast, we have the baritone of bike broadcasting, an exquisite writer for hire, not to mention On Track Off-Road's digital magazine long-term MotoGP columnist, Mr. Neil Morrison. Why are you chuckling, Neil? I'm trying to big you up.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Normally you say things that are not nice about me, but that was probably the nicest thing you've ever said.
Yeah, I know my disparaging comments are not that bad. Come on. Gentlemen, are we both inflated on Portuguese pastéis de Belém cakes? Are you ready to change to some tapas?
There really were an awful lot of cakes in the press room. They did put, they love their biscuits and their sweet things there. So I will have to move to something a little bit more solid.
I mean, I think it's more fresh fish that we've been dining off for the last couple of days. Seafood is pretty spicy around these parts of the Algarve. So I tried to lay off the cakes as much as possible and keep it principally to salty things. But yeah, the fish down here, absolutely get on it.
What a hardship, Neil. I hope you didn't get any little bones stuck in your craw. That would have been something of a disaster. But let's talk about the fourth Grand Prix a full visit, I should say, to the Algarve International Circuit. We didn't get very lucky with the weather, did we? But then Fabio Quartararo, for the first time since Silverstone 2021, taking victory on the Monster Energy Yamaha. First podium of the season for Johann Zarco as well. Was that quite timely, gentlemen? Actually, was he on the podium in Qatar?
He was on the podium in Indonesia.
Indonesia, right. Okay. So there we go. As usual, the first class research kicking in very early on the Paddock Pass podcast. But, does it also say something for Johann Zarco that I don't remember him being on the podium so far this season? Is he going to be a bit of a sleeper dark horse as usual? It was the second top three for Aleix Espargaro, who went from being World Championship leader to, let's say, a little bit more of mid top 10 obscurity back to the top three. So another trophy, the second one in as many, 5 rounds for the how can we describe him, the exaggerated Spaniard, who does like to harp on slightly, doesn't he? We've had some problematic areas through turns 1, 2, and 3, of course, around the track. We'll get through those in a minute. Not only crashes in MotoGP, but also in Moto2. But first of all, gents, before we get into any more talking points, your moments of the weekend. Neil, what was the first thing that stood out for you?
The first thing that stood out, was probably the Moto2 race and that really terrifying 11-rider crash that we had, I think, 9 laps into the race. My moment was basically when I realized, and when we all realized, that there were no serious injuries there. Aaron Canet obviously fractured, I think, the radius bone in his right arm, and I think a little finger as well. His participation in Jerez is in some doubt. I think Sam Lowe's took a real big whack to his back, elbow and arm, and is definitely feeling less than 100% after that. But in the grand scheme of things, it could have been really so much worse. I think it was pretty terrifying for everyone watching. Bikes going everywhere. Lowe's in particular, I think, was on course to get sandwiched between a stationary bike and a bike traveling at 70 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour. Thankfully managed to get pushed out of the way of that. And a few riders basically getting up in the gravel, didn't get collected by the sort of bikes and the madness coming forth. So really scary moment. Another one of those moments where you feel that we got away with one, because I think watching that live, immediate reaction was something really serious has happened. So thankfully, no huge, serious, life-threatening injuries. Just the broken arm for Canet, which is obviously terrible for his championship challenge. But yeah, it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, scary stuff. Actually, our Spanish colleague, Chechu Lazaro, tweeted this morning that Canet's already had surgery and is actually, putting one eye on participation in Jerez next weekend, which would be quite staggering, really, considering not only the violence of the crash and the injury, but the fact that he can get fit again to consider racing in Moto2 once more. Props to Chechu, by the way, who's recovering from a broken collarbone. And he's got much more respect for me because he sustained the injury playing football. So good lad.
Worth pointing out that Canet's injury is a fractured radius, so that's basically the bottom of the bone which connects to your hand. It's a wrist injury. It's quite common. It's quite easy to fix. This is not going to be a repeat of Marc Marquez in Jerez 2020.
And it was, I guess, a quick synopsis or a summary of the Moto2 incident. I mean, I saw a lot of people on Twitter yesterday basically saying that red flags should have maybe come out a little bit earlier. There were, I guess, some riders, I think Tony Arbolino, Sam Lowes, they both felt that the race probably should have been stopped 1 or 2 laps before the incident occurred on lap 9. But just looking at the times and hearing what some of the riders were saying, I mean, it did seem like a very sudden event, like the basically, I think Dave and I were talking about this yesterday. He noted that Canet had just done his personal best lap sector time in sector 1 the previous lap, and I think it was Celestino Vietti was saying that turn 1 on lap 9 when they all crashed, everything was cool, absolutely no warning whatsoever. So it does seem that there was just a very sudden bit of rainfall, a very sudden shower, and it caught almost everyone out. So I don't know if we can really lay the blame at race direction for being a little slow with bringing the red flags out.
I think my moment of the weekend was actually in a similar area of the track, and sorry to point towards a moment of misfortune, but it was the Jack Miller and Joan Mir takeout, I guess. Similarities to, I mean, we've seen it on a number of occasions, haven't we? Maybe the incident that most springs to mind for me is Valentino Rossi and Casey Stoner at Jerez. Okay, it was in soaking wet conditions that year, but there was little Mir could do, even though he was already very hot into turn 1. I mean, you can see just from the way he was braking late and released, turning into the curve. And then Miller, I think he explained he hit maybe possibly a damp patch because he was slightly offline going for the inside of the corner. And it was initially a relief to see they were both okay, but also quite amusing when Joan Mir gave him the slow golf clap. Looked like he was going over to remonstrate with him, saw that Miller actually might be hurt. So there was like a kind of a mini cycle of emotions there, from rage to disappointment to concern. It was almost amusing in that respect. But big shame for Joan Mir. Also, that consistency that we've spoken about over the races so far this season, and also Jack Miller, who was warming up, saying he'd been conserving his tyres, he was building up his pace, so he was really getting into the race. Looked a surefire bet for a podium finish, and then it ended up in the rather large chunks of gravel, which was another little strange character of the Grand Prix weekend. I'm sure we can talk about that a little bit later. Dave, what stood out for you from the Grand Prix?
What stood out for me, I think, was the fact that Fabio Quartararo was able to overtake Joan Mir on the straight, sort of towards the end of the straight. Obviously, we've heard a lot about the top speed of the Yamaha. Fabio is completely convinced that the bike isn't fast enough, and the speed charts would tend to agree with him. What it really showed is that top speed doesn't always matter if you can compensate in other areas, because the way that Fabio did it was he was carrying so much speed down that fantastic last corner, down the hill, and then up and over the crest, that he was coming out there much, much faster. Joan Mir by that time was starting to struggle with his front tyre, so he couldn't carry the same sort of speed through that corner. And the way he came past there and flew past, it just showed that when everything is right with the Yamaha, it's still a very competitive bike, as long as it's Fabio Quartararo who's on board and riding it.
Well, Dave, let's get into that talking point then, because Yamaha are in a strange situation again. I mean, I actually put them down as my winners from the weekend because of the situation with Quartararo, and it seems if they can tie him to another contract, then they're going to be in good shape. But their situation continues to be bizarre. It's almost as if the season would be a complete disaster if it wasn't for one individual and a very mature approach he has to the racing season. I mean, how did you see things after, especially talking to the likes of Andrea Dovizioso and Darren Binder and also Frankie Morbidelli, who, it just seems a little bit more lost every Grand Prix that we go on in the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of changes for Morbidelli also because he has a new crew chief. He has a new crew. It's all been shifted around a little bit. His crew chief is also completely new to crew chief. I think he's a very, very experienced suspension engineer who, I mean, he is genuinely one of the very best sort of suspension people in the paddock. But crew chiefing is a little bit different. It takes a little bit of it's a different role. That bike is difficult. All of the Yamaha riders, except for Fabio, says the biggest problem is grip. Andrea Dovizioso was explaining really the rear starts to slide, and once the rear starts to slide, it doesn't come back again until you sort of get back on again, or until you get the bike completely upright. So the slide starts right on the edge of the tire, and then it sort of just carries on. And that's what's been the real difficulty for, according to Dovizioso, also according to Morbidelli, it really is a grip problem. Not according to Fabio. Fabio says, "Look, I just need top speed. More grip is always nice, but top speed is where I'm getting killed," because he says, whenever there's a bike in front of you, you can't use that strength of the Yamaha, the corner speed, and make the big round sweeping corners. If others are doing big sort of V corners, then there's just no room for you to go underneath. One interesting point, which I thought he said, is Marc Marquez. It was never going to be a problem with Marc Marquez because Marc Marquez is such a late breaker that he leaves enough room for Quartararo to keep carrying the corner speed sort of thing. But it's especially the Ducatis, which are braking a little bit earlier, and they're just, holding up the Yamaha. They're getting in the way. So it's a bit of a difficult situation for Yamaha right now. Right now, there is one person who is really good. I mean, the second Yamaha across the line was Andrea Dovizioso, 29 seconds behind the winner on the same bike. Franco even further back. It's we all know that Fabio is looking at his contract. He's asking for a lot of money, and frankly, whatever they're paying him, they need to pay him. It's as simple as that. There's no one else can currently win on that bike. He was also quite funny in the press conference when he was asked, a race like that, does this change your attitude towards your contract? And he said no, and then he said, I'm in Kimi mode, which even as someone who doesn't watch F1 I thought was quite funny.
Yeah, you'd think you could. That was an opportunity to throw in some sort of quip about adding another zero onto the contract or whatever else. That would have been quite illuminating. But I think Fabio's a little bit more discreet and modest than that. Dave, also Neil. I mean, the priority for Yamaha is clear, isn't it? I mean, they know what they need to do. They need more horses coming from the engine, but do you think the manufacturer is in almost like a Honda situation now, where they have one guy who's making the package work? So how much do you alter and try and change it? And what possibilities do you have to change for your other riders? I mean, there's a similar situation that we saw a couple of years ago with Marc Marquez. You had the likes of Taka Nakagami, Jorge Lorenzo, Cal Crutchlow, these riders complaining about front end feel, really struggling with the RCV. And, we'll talk about Honda a little bit later in the pod, but are Yamaha in a similar boat now? Is that the feeling, Neil? I mean, do you get that vibe?
Yeah, I do get that vibe, and it's a strange situation for Yamaha. I mean, we've had right the way through history periods where one rider and only one rider has really been able to get the very best out of the Honda. Normally, his name is Marc Marquez, maybe Casey Stoner in years gone by as well. But you look at MotoGP history, and Yamaha has had this reputation of being the bike that anyone can jump on and be relatively quick fairly straight away. I mean, you think back to the time when Cal Crutchlow and Andrea Dovizioso were scoring podiums on it. They had pretty different riding styles to what the conventional Jorge Lorenzo-esque Yamaha style was. Valentino Rossi was never a Lorenzo-esque rider, yet he was able to fight for championships on the same bike. And even as recently as like 2017, 2018, you think of someone like Hafi Siren jumped on the Yamaha, when was that, 2018, and was scoring top tens in his second ever race in MotoGP.
Jonas Folger now as well.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that Hafi Siren maybe wasn't one of the most talented guys that's been in MotoGP recently. So it is very strange, and it's tough to really see where things go for Morbidelli here. I mean, he was fantastic at Portimao in 2020 and then 2021, despite all of his issues at the start of last year. I think he was something like 15 seconds slower than his race time from a year ago. And I mean, those are like massive numbers to be talking about. It's just, you do wonder whether the fact that Quartararo is able to extract the very most of it, it just has it's caused Yamaha not to basically try and make a more balanced package that works for everyone. So it's quite troubling really from that point of view. But as long as Quartararo is on it, you do feel that they will have a chance this year.
Guys, the team manager of Red Bull KTM, Francesco Guidotti, used a word like crucial for the Jerez test, which is coming up in just over a week for KTM. So, you'd imagine Aprilia as well looking to make significant upgrades, but the last team to have concessions and have that extra freedom when it comes to alterations to the package and the motorcycle throughout the year. But Dave, I mean, do you think we can see anything radical from Yamaha, or is it just not possible with the current configuration of the M1 they have?
I mean, they can't do anything about the engine. They're stuck with the engine that they've got until the end of the year. They might be able to find, little bits here and there. They might be able to find something with to get more grip, which would mean, maybe a new swing arm, maybe something with geometry, something with setup, just to change a little bit, maybe even a new chassis. But yeah, to me, they might make a small step, but they're not going to make a massive step. So they are a bit stuck. They might make things a little bit better for certainly for the other riders, for Dovizioso and for Morbidelli. I think also Morbidelli really needs to get his head around a few things. He said, look, I need to. He can't even wait for the Jerez test. He has to wait for FP1 to try some things to try to improve the setup.
I think it's also quite interesting listening to, Fabio's performance in the press conference afterwards, because as Dave was mentioning, Dovizioso and Morbidelli have been talking about the need for rear grip, and Fabio was basically saying, well, like they keep talking about this rear grip thing, but did you see the rear grip I had coming out of the final corner this race? That wasn't such an issue. It's more top speed in you. Maybe that's a little insight into where the kind of two priorities for Fabio and then for the other two, where they lie and how those kind of views maybe differ to some degree as well. So yes, Yamaha has never traditionally been a factory that brings big improvements mid-season, certainly not in recent history anyway. But yeah, they certainly need to bring something, just because there is no sort of guarantee that Fabio can go on a run. Yes, he has the potential to, and I think he's arguably the best guy out there at the moment on the MotoGP grid. But all it takes is a bad qualifying for another disastrous race, and that is a very, very, very fine line to be walking when there's 17 races still ahead.
We're going to use the rear grip we have on this podcast to come to a small pause and take a little ad break, but we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the Paddock Pass Podcast. This show this week talking post Portuguese Grand Prix and right on the eve of the Jerez. Goodness, I was going to say test, but also the Grand Prix. Let me try and get the official title here. Gran Premio Red Bull de España. It's been Red Bull sponsored for quite a few years now, isn't it? Even since Valentino Rossi took one of his last victories, 2000. I'm going to be wrong here, Neil, so correct me. 2017?
16.
16. Oh, so close. There we go. Yeah, there's lots to be said for preparation, having web pages open while you're doing your podcasts, ladies and gentlemen. We always aim for the highest standards of professionalism here. But listen, guys, one thing I wanted to talk about after, Portimao was basically where on earth do we stand with the MotoGP World Championship? I know it's fruitless and it's pointless to really sort of ruminate on where the championship's going to go this year, but it's fun, isn't it? I mean, let's bench race for a little bit. I mean, can we consider the likes of Alessio Spargaro and Elia Bastianini after Austin was being talked about as a world championship contender? Obviously had his DNF, in unfortunate circumstances after I think he crashed during Saturday as well. And the Grand Prix itself was a real kind of another irregular event, we could say, after the rainy conditions on Friday and Saturday. You guys knowing all about that, of course, being there on the ground. So do we have any kind of clear idea? And also I want to ask, what do you both think of Alex Rins? I mean, do we have to take him seriously? I know that the answer is obviously yes, because he's in great form, but I'm just wondering what's going to happen by the time we get to Grand Prix 14, 15, 16.
I disagree. I think Portimao actually cleared up a lot of things. I think we saw a few bikes, especially the Ducatis, they sorted themselves out. Pecco Bagnaia, considering that he, really, nearly put himself out for a couple of races in Q1 and then ended up starting from the back and then crossed the line in 8th. That's a pretty spectacular result. And he was saying, my feeling with the bike is fantastic. Jack Miller was the same until he suddenly crashed out. He said, my feeling with the bike is fantastic. Johann Zarco on the podium again for the second time this year. That bike is getting sorted. So the Ducati's nearly that. Sure, there's a lot of points to, I think 38 points Pecco is behind Quartararo, but we're 16 races left to go. There is a very, very long way to go. Fabio Quartararo showed that on the right bike, he's got the bogey tracks behind him, the Austins and the Qatars, and we're going into the European section. He's not going to enjoy Barcelona. Well, he might do because he did very well at Barcelona last year, apart from all the clothing shenanigans. But Barcelona, Mugello is going to be difficult in places. But there's a whole bunch of tracks, Assen, all of these tracks which are really going to play into his hands. So Quartararo is clearly a championship favourite. I think Pecco Bagnaia, now that the Ducati is starting to work, he has the time to come back. I don't think Zarco is going to be a championship contender because he's on the Pramac bike and they keep on throwing parts at it, and he's still the only rider using that front ride height device. Joan Mir, despite being taken out by Jack Miller, I thought that was a fantastic ride by him because he was really struggling with his front tyre and yet he was still almost impossible to overtake. It was clear that he was holding the others up. No one was going to stop Fabio Quartararo, but I don't think he would have won by 6 seconds if Mir had not been in the way, or if he'd had a better front tyre. And yes, I do think Alex Rins is a genuine candidate because his talent has never been in doubt. It's never been the issue. The issue with Alex Rins has always been, he gets distracted and his mind wanders off and starts playing Subbuteo or something. I don't know what he's doing, but he certainly isn't racing motorbikes. I think it's getting clear. The only question mark is what happens with Honda, but we'll be talking about later on, I think.
But Dave, I still think there's far too much randomness. I mean, you say that the Ducatis are sorted, but then you see, two riders that are arguably the future of the brand in their racing circles, and also even their hopes for 2022, both going down in this Grand Prix. So the momentum and the feeling and the vibe around, Enea Bastianini and Jorge Martin from Austin has been completely removed. Johann Zarco, what are we expecting from him, in Jerez and Montmeló and Le Mans? Is he going to go back to being the 7th, 8th place guy? I think you have a point about, getting to Europe, getting a little bit more of a consistent feel or a regular feel. But then I still think there was a lot of things being chucked into the pot here to muddy the waters. And for Rinzi, I think, you made a great point. The talent, yes. The mentality, no. I mean, this guy has had problems building a championship campaign his whole career. So while I think he's going to be an undoubted race winner and a podium contender on fleeting appearances, I just question whether he's going to be right there, like I said, in the deep part of the season, when we get to the flyaways again and everybody's slightly feeling the length of the season. What do you reckon, Neil?
I think Rins has been pretty sensational this year. I mean, we have to talk about his first lap in Portimao. That was probably the most spectacular first lap we've seen for quite some time. I think he picked off 13 riders, coming from 23rd in the grid to 10th. And there was a great video, I think, on MotoGP's website, which had a helicopter shot basically of the first 4 or 5 turns. And he was just extremely clever, very brave, but just extremely clever with how he placed his bike, and it was usually to the outside into heavy braking zones, especially into turn 3. Then he could basically go and pick off 3 or 4 riders there and be on the inside for turn 4. But it was aggressive, it was precise, it was absolutely what he had to do. So I think, on the basis of his performances so far, Rins is currently in the mix for sure. The name that interests me is whether we can start taking Aleix Espargaro seriously as a challenger, because this was another race where he was really strong. Probably could have got second place had he not got caught up with Alex Marquez in the first laps. Obviously, he was a bit outspoken about Alex having the temerity to pass him back after he had made a move. How dare the Honda rider get in front of him and get his elbows out when they're racing at this MotoGP level. But once again, we go to a track. I guess this is similar to Argentina in some respects. We had no dry setup time. Basically, in Argentina, it was very limited. And the Aprilia is strong right out the box. I mean, they have a really strong base setting that seems to need just minor tweaks for Aleix to be fast. And the tracks that are coming up that Dave mentioned, Jerez, Le Mans, Mugello. These are all tracks where Aleix was within 10 seconds of the race winner in the dry. I think Le Mans was the exception because it was a wet race last year, and we know that this is definitely an improved package. So I can see Aleix being in the mix as well when we get to maybe not the summer break, or maybe the summer break, I'm not sure. But he's making this a consistent thing, and it's no longer surprising to see him up on the podium. Like Silverstone last year, it was like, oh my God, Aprilia have got back in the top 3, and it's their first podium since 2000. Now it's like, okay, Aprilia are here, and we expect him to be there. So yeah, I think that's one name that I'm most intrigued about, seeing whether he can hold on and last the distance.
Definitely interesting. Aleix is a really, really interesting case. Sort of chatting to a few people, and it doesn't really seem like Aprilia are concentrating on Aleix. They're much more interested in Maverick Vinales, seeing Maverick gets on. Once again, Maverick said, if I could have qualified further forward, I would have been better. But then, I suppose the answer is that they all say that. First of all, he has to qualify further forward. Aleix is looking really, really strong. And I think the question mark with Aleix is what happens once he gets under pressure. What happens if he's, 10 points back or 5 points back from the championship lead with maybe 3 or 4 races to go, and he's in with a chance. Then I think we'll see. But that Aprilia is looking like a really complete motorcycle. It does a lot of things really, really well. The bike is clearly competitive. They will lose their concessions in the next, probably, shall we say, 3 or 4 races, because you've got to think they need one more podium, any position, and they lose concessions. So yeah, they're just not that far off. They're in really, really good shape.
Do you think that Portimao accentuated the fact that riders, like you said, Neil, I'm sorry, Dave, I think it was with the Aprilia base setting being particularly strong. Do you think, and also because it was raining on Friday and Saturday, riders didn't have the most chance to get ready for the race. Do you think the riders that are able to maximize what they have under them, really kind of excelled in Portugal? And that also bodes well for the upcoming races, because, you see Enea Bastianini as well so far this year with the GP21, really getting the most out of that motorcycle. Rins with the Suzuki, just needed a bit of extra speed on a bike that, as we gather, hasn't changed radically from 2021. it seems that the riders that are further clued in to what they have are able to really maximize bizarre circumstances like we saw in Portugal, and we could find in the next couple of races. I mean, Fabio Quartararo is like a double winner in Jerez, so that bodes well for him.
I think the interesting thing about Portimao is the fact that we were here in October and Michelin had bought exactly the same tyres. So the riders, even though they didn't have very much setup time, they didn't have a lot to change, if you like. Conditions were very similar to last year. The tyres were exactly the same. The bikes were different. So that's a little bit of a change. But yeah, I mean, they didn't have a lot of work to do. And I think, you know, like I said, we're going to Jerez this weekend. The weather is looking really good. We're going to have 3 sunny, dry days, and then we're going to have a sunny, dry day of testing afterwards. I think from here on in, everyone is getting close to a base setting. Certainly the Aprilia had a good base setting. Suzuki had a good base setting. But like I say, you know, if all the Ducatis are saying, you know, we basically stuck the Austin setting in and it worked and I felt great on it, then it looks like everyone is getting to that same point where the thing is working. So I mean, we kept on saying the season starts at Jerez, and I think it's beyond doubt now. It's beyond dispute. Everyone seems to have everything sorted.
Are you sure it starts in Jerez, Dave? I'm sure you said Portugal before, and you know, depending on the state of your fantasy team, I think it could stretch back to Le Mans or maybe even Mugello. So let me know when this season officially starts, okay?
Valencia, mate.
I did enjoy you putting this to Elation. He was like, "What? The season started in Qatar, Dave. What are you talking about?"
Listen, on the subject of fantasy teams, it's been a disaster for me. I mean, Mir was taken out, and I swapped Marc Marquez in at the last minute because I thought, you know, there's a chance there could be a shower during warm. There could be some kind of bizarre weather thing, and you know, there's nobody better in sort of changeable conditions than Marc Marquez. But Neil, the situation, well, sort of Dave as well, whoever wants to chip in, the situation with, you know, Marc and the Hondas, it's getting more confusing by the week rather than clearer. I mean, is that the sort of situation you guys see as well?
Yeah, I mean, this was kind of my big talking point from this weekend, or certainly one of them anyway, was the performance of the Hondas. It was puzzling. I think you look at Marc's performance, and like normally there's something you take home from watching him in a race, whether it's kind of riskiness or a spark or some kind of crazy overtaking move. And yes, there was that. It was a neat move on his brother. Turned 13 on both of the final 2 laps, but aside from that, it was just there was nothing really there. It was very subdued. You were just looking and waiting for something to happen, but at no point did he look really competitive. At no point did you get the impression that he was really coming forward. It was one of the very few occasions, I think, aside from 2021, for obvious reasons, when he was coming back from a massive injury and still far from physically fully fit. You know, it was one of those really rare performances where he just looked like another rider in the pack. And I could count probably on the number of times I've thought that about him in MotoGP on one hand, 2021 aside. So it was strange. And certainly the comments coming out of Honda after the race were, I guess, slightly disconcerting. You know, on the basis of the 2 tests that we had at Sepang and at Indonesia, we were thinking that this was a new, obviously it's a completely new bike, but it looked like it had become a more usable bike for all riders. But you know, Marc made some interesting comments after the race, which was obviously a real barb and dig in the ribs at Team Paul Espargaro, where he was saying, you know, certain riders were saying this bike was fantastic and amazing during preseason. And I was always thinking, you know, during preseason, you've got all this Michelin rubber down on the tarmac and the grip is absolutely fantastic. It's ideal, but race weekends aren't like that. And normally during a race weekend, you don't have that level of grip. So are we really sure that this bike is going to perform at this level right the way through the season? And certainly it seems that certain people in Honda are basically making the analysis that this is a pretty serious situation. You know, this is not something that can be fixed overnight. So I find it really quite fascinating. Obviously, they've tried to address the issues of last year's bike by sorting out the chronic lack of rear grip. It's the first time basically that Honda has designed the bikes around this Michelin rear tire profile that was introduced in 2020, which offers a lot more edge grip. This is to try and take advantage of that. And by doing that, it seems as though they've lost, as Marc Marquez has said, a part of kind of typical Honda DNA, which is that strength under braking, that really good feeling with the front end of the bike, which allows him to perform the kind of miraculous late braking feats that he's famous for and he's become known for. So very strange. 16 seconds off Quartararo, I think, it's a big old chunk. But you do wonder whether this is something that can be addressed soon.
I mean, yes, Honda is. They are in trouble. And Mark's point I thought was interesting, because I remember that KTM, when they were still developing the bike, so they stayed for the Jerez test on the Monday, and then they stayed for 2 more days because on the Tuesday there was a Moto2 test, and the Moto2 test picked up all of the Michelin rubber and cleaned the track up and left a much worse track to test. It was much more slippery, and so when the KTMs got back on track, it was much more of a realistic race simulation sort of thing. So this is really that I thought was a really clever approach to sort of understanding it, and that's what sort of really Honda needs to do. And what they've taken away from Mark is it's not just the braking; it is specifically. What Mark does is he makes a really, really sharp V. What he's capable of doing is pivoting the bike on the front wheel. So he brakes really late, really deep, and then flicks the bike around to fire out of the corner. He could do that also partly because there wasn't so much rear grip, so he could get the bike sort of flicked round and find the grip in the traction area. But when you take front feeling away, then you can't do that. It's really sort of defanged his main weapon, the main thing he used to attack people and to be fast. And I think that is a serious problem.
Yeah, it's a great analysis, Neil. And also, Dave, on the riding style. I can remember 2019 standing on the inside of turn 2 at Valencia, and you can really see, the way that Marquez was attacking that corner. I mean, it was a perfect illustration of that style you're talking about. But just to speak more generally about Honda, guys, what do they do for their general strategy now? I mean, you can forgive Pol Espargaro to a degree because he's still learning the motorcycle. I mean, it's his second year in the team. He's had a season and a bit. It's a completely new model, so he has a different kind of orientation to get his head around again. But then also, we're learning rumors about LCR, maybe a complete rider swap around. I mean, maybe HRC are saying we've made the investment to change the bike to suit the Michelin tire. Now we need the riders maybe to throw something in. I mean, Taka Nakagami in his debrief was kind of hinting as much. He was saying the bike has improved. It has the potential. We need to perform as well. So it's a strange situation where the riders are caught. Obviously, they want to aim for that objective, but they can't quite do it. And then they have the pressure of maybe, external forces and other riders maybe taking their saddle in a contract year. So it's a little bit of a whirlwind at the moment that's going to land somewhere and very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to say that you asked Dad, what do they do from here? I mean, I think it's clear what they do from here. They follow Marc Marquez's wishes and advice and feedback. I mean, it's what they've just done right the way through his time in the Premier class. At this stage,
hang on, Neil. Hang on, I'll interrupt you there. Do you again bank on Marc, or do you try and find a bigger check and sign Fabio and think, right, okay, we still need to be very flexible with the development of our bike, because maybe we'll have the next generation of star coming in?
I think you follow Marc because he's already got a contract for the next 2 years after this one. So you've already banked on your big star and what he can do. And, he has shown flashes this year of the rider we saw in 2019, occasionally in 2021. He hasn't been able to do it consistently, but then you would say that is because the bike has not been to his liking. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, but when you've analysed the situation, recent history, I think that is what they'll do. He's the guy. Paul Espargaro is not going to win the championship this year. None of the LCR guys are going to win the championship. That is without question. So you're going to look and listen to the main man, the man that is still a really, tough, bruising start to the year, only 38 points off the championship leader, comes away from Portimao actually closer to the championship lead than he was after Austin. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that I think that is what they do, and I think it's pretty obvious that's what they do. Just another quick thing. I mean, it is worth stating that despite there being some rather pessimistic noises coming out of the Honda camp after this race, it was a strange weekend. They do have a completely new bike for 2022. It's not like the Yamaha, which is basically the same as they had at the end of last year. Having morning warm-up and a quick dash in Q2 to basically set the bike, a completely new bike up to like this pretty strange and challenging track. I mean, that's obviously not good preparation. So I think it's dangerous to make some big sweeping conclusions that Honda are really in trouble here. Because, again, we've had a strange MotoGP weekend with weather, basically limiting dry weather running. But there are a few signs of trouble, I guess, there. Someone said to me, someone from a rival team said to me or pointed out to me that, had Marc not even had those issues in Austin, yes, he might have won the race, but he might have won the race just like when you think of previous years when Marc is strong, he can clear off at Austin almost at will and is riding within himself. You kind of feel like if he wanted to, he could drop the pace by more than a second. And that wasn't even the case, even when he was completely on the limit at Austin. So that is another indicator that we're still not seeing him or the bike anywhere near their best. So, yes, I think some cause for concern, but let's maybe wait until Jerez to see exactly how far away they are.
Well, we're going to take this moment to place a call to Alberto Puig and advise him on HRC race strategy for the next season or two, and we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the Paddock Pass Podcast, the last section of this show, or we're going to kind of have a look at Jerez, a little bit of a preview, but also examine our winners and losers from the Portuguese Grand Prix. Dave, who kind of, I asked you who stood out earlier, but who was your winner from this race?
My winner from this race is Ducati, because we've been asking. We came into the season expecting Ducati to just blow everyone away. And the first couple of races, they were not blowing everyone away. They were doing very much not that. And this was the first race where we had all of the Ducati sounding happy. Obviously, mistakes were made, and it was a bit strange. But I think definitely this was the race where Ducati found their feet. It confirmed that the bike is good, the bike works, they can be competitive when it's there. And I think if Pecco Bagnaia hadn't sort of tried to launch himself at the moon, then and had started in the front couple of rows, it might have been a very different race. So I really think, I mean, it doesn't look at it on paper. If you just look sort of just the results completely in isolation, it doesn't look like it. But I think this was really where Ducati laid the base for future success.
I'm going to have to say my winner from the weekend, we've already kind of covered it, Fabio Quartararo. Yamaha, he saved their ass again. I think, the likes of the race management who are trying to plot their way through changes for the brand, the machinery, whatever else. Quartararo, I think also from analysing his demeanour and his words, he's kept calm through the preseason test where it was clear that the Yamaha had such a disadvantage. And I think this has been a huge boost for his confidence. I think, coming into the next couple of races, some tracks that could be very strong for that package, then, we're going to see the world champion emerge, maybe on a different level of performance. And I think, like we said on the note show on Sunday, Dave, I mean, Quartararo has already done something we haven't seen since 2019, which is the reigning world champion win a Grand Prix. So, of course, it didn't happen in 2020. Marc Marquez, they'd been injured, and then Joan Mir couldn't quite get that win for Suzuki, of course, last year. So Quartararo, it's been quite a long time since that win in Silverstone in Great Britain, but then he's managed to do it again. So, well done, Fabio. He's my winner. Neil?
I'm frozen.
I think I'll have to go with Alex Rins. We mentioned him briefly earlier. I think this is maybe the first time that he's ever, he's just behind Fabio because he hasn't won a race, but they're tied in points at the top of the championship. I think it's the first time Rins has ever been that close to the championship lead in MotoGP. And he was fantastic. I mean, everything looked pretty bad, pretty negative after qualifying. He completely messed up his strategy in Q1. Didn't have any comfortable feeling in the wet, then went out on slick tires, had a few big rear moments and pitted. And basically when he came back out, he didn't have enough time to get his rear tire up to temperature. With hindsight, he should have just stayed out and got his tires going, and then he would have been strong at the end of that session. But I think with a good qualifying, Rins maybe could have gone with Quartararo at the front. He looked at his pace certainly later in the race before he wore his front tire out. And he was running, mid 39s, just like Fabio was doing for fun. If he wasn't able to beat Fabio, then he would have been, I think a comfortable second. So another race where Rins was really impressive. And this one just required a completely different skill set from what we've seen so far this year. I mean, we're used to him coming from the third or fourth row, but not from the back row. And he handled that with a pretty exemplary attitude. You think of someone in the past, like maybe Maverick Vinales, starting this race from the back of the grid and how it was just, a disaster. Rins attacked it and, kept this really good run of momentum going.
Neil, 2021 was very damaging for Alex Rins' career, to the point where we thought he's bound to be replaced in the Suzuki team. Are we at the point where he's completely repaired that kind of damage this season? Or, what's it going to take us to make a lot of people believe, right, yeah, he's completely in it? Is it going to take another couple of podiums, a bit more consistency, or should we get serious about him right now?
I think it's probably going to take a win or two. We haven't seen him win a race since Silverstone? Aragon in 2020. And yes, I think both of the Suzuki guys, we are expecting that step up now. We almost expected it on Sunday there with Joan actually leading the race for the first time, I think, since Valencia 2020. That didn't quite happen. So yeah, everything's sort of in place, you feel, with Suzuki and their bike. But I think it would take maybe a race win or two for Rins to really make us take him seriously as a championship contender. We still haven't seen that yet, but a couple of good tracks coming up from now.
Dave, where there are winners, there are of course losers. So who was worthy of your pity from Portimao?
I have to say that it's Marc Marquez, because he was racing against his brother, Alex Marquez, and Alex Marquez is no Marc Marquez. The Honda just won't do what he needs it to do. And so I think this was one of those races, and I think it's right. Honda suffered most at Portimao because they didn't have the data, they didn't have the base setup, because the bike is so completely new. They still need to work. It's going to be a long season for Marc, I think, because he looked like just another guy. He looks more like Alex than Marc Marquez, and that I think is quite a concern if you're HRC. It's certainly a concern if you're Marc Marquez. Marc Marquez is used to winning, and afterwards he looked quite sort of resigned to his fate. But it was also clear that this is not what he was about. This isn't why he signed up. He signed up to be winning races, and as it is right now, he's not in that situation.
My loser is quite brief, actually. I'm going to identify Brad Binder. It's been a strong and consistent start to the season for the South African. I think his crash, pushing for a better position and points during the race, ended a sequence of almost 20 races, 20 point scoring finishes. So that was a rare occurrence for Brad, and a shame because it kind of pulled him down the standings. I think he's down to 7th now after previously being as high as 2nd. Still a long way to go, of course, but there's if you remember in 2020 when he was a MotoGP rookie, he showed some fantastic speed at Jerez. So, if things are looking promising for the KTM package right from FP1, FP2 in Spain this coming weekend, then, you expect to see the 33 back up there. Neil, who was your abject performer from Portugal?
I guess it's a pretty obvious one to add, but I have to say Jack Miller for kind of obvious reasons. There was a podium there for him. You have to feel, at the very least, there was second place there, and he made a mistake at a pretty critical place, taking down Joan Mir. That's never good. But yeah, it was a mistake. It was a misjudgment from him going into turn one. And it's a costly fall. And you look at Miller this year, and it's just been up and down again. And when you think like, okay, he's had a good result and he has a bit of a footing to kick on, then something befalls him again. So there was a chance to get a second podium on the bounce, going into two tracks that he won at last year, Jerez and Le Mans. He comes away with a pretty costly DNF. This was a weekend when his future was the subject of much speculation. Jack was saying that there was no truth to the rumours linking him to LCR Honda for next year. Davide Tardozzi insisted that Ducati want to keep him within their stable, but it definitely looks as though Jack will not be remaining in the factory team next year. That is going to be a straight shootout between Martin and Bastianini. So yes, I would say this is a kind of an incident that wouldn't make Ducati, for example, reconsider that decision. So yeah, a pretty damaging weekend for Jack, I would say.
For obvious reasons, Fabio Quartararo is the top pick on people's shopping list. But why is there so much, conjecture and talk about Jack Miller and his contract all the time? I mean, the guy must be completely exasperated by it. Is it to do with performance? Is it to do with the fact that there's, promising Italian riders surrounding him? Is it the fact that Ducati have so many riders at their disposal? Why is Miller always being asked about his contract status?
Because he's not performing. I mean, he's doing very well, but he's not Italian. If he was Italian, he would be getting away with these kind of performances, but he's not Italian. He's in Ducati. He's expected to win. He's expected to be a championship contender. He's not quite a championship contender. He makes too many mistakes, and that is, that's putting his future at risk. There are fast Italians. I mean, the problem is there are fast youngsters coming up behind him. Anea Bastianini is looking good. Jorge Martin. I heard a few things that would suggest that Jorge Martin might be the rider to get the second Ducati seat. So the fact that this is happening, the fact that this is that everyone is looking at who's going to replace him, that's why we're hearing about him. Because the thing is, he is a very, very good MotoGP rider. He's capable of winning. He's shown that he's capable of winning races. He's shown that he's capable of podiums. But the reason the reason people Ducati are looking past him is because there are younger, faster riders.
Do you think it's a big Grand Prix for him next weekend, considering he won at Jerez last time out? I mean, if Jack Miller's finishing 6th or 7th or making a mistake and crashing out again, is that really going to be the door on the hinges for him in Bologna?
I don't know. I mean, it's tough to say, really. Ducati do like Jack. He's an honest rider. As Dave said, he's a really good MotoGP rider. You can maybe think of him as being in the mix for a couple of MotoGP wins a year. Is he going to be a championship contender? I mean, that's up for discussion. But there is reason to believe that Ducati don't want to get rid of him. He could maybe slot into the Pramac squad next year if Martin steps up. So I'm not sure. I think it would have to be a real disastrous run of results before Ducati are saying goodbye, Jack. So I don't know. But yes, it's obviously it's a big race weekend for him, just because he's had a crash and a fairly stop-start beginning to this year.
Maybe it's a budget thing. Ducati have to look around their pit box, because if Davide Tardozzi kicks or smashes anything, when Jack makes a mistake, then they're just running out of panels to change. But no, I don't want to be too facetious. Well, let's take the final word here on the podcast about Jerez, guys. This weekend could be the first time we see the Spanish Grand Prix back to anything like the pomp it used to enjoy, and used to make it one of the events where we'd always recommend it to people as one of the most atmospheric Grand Prix on the calendar. Are we looking forward to getting back there? I mean, it's a track that arguably every rider knows more than any other. And of course, like we said, there is a special character and flavor to it. I mean, I certainly won't be missing the revving motorcycles all the way through the night in downtown Jerez, but it's still kind of a special place, isn't
it? It's going to be interesting to see what effect having Jerez and Portimao, which they're only 3.5 hours apart by car, the fact that they're back to back, what effect that will have. I think it might affect Portimao more than Jerez. It's going to be interesting to see how many people actually turn up to a Spanish race, whether we get back to the sort of hundreds of thousands or we're down in the sort of 40,000s, which we've tended to see after the pandemic. And yeah, I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to it just because it's lovely, and also because it's not going to rain, which after a fairly miserable weekend, that sounds like a good deal to me. And I am very much looking forward to Fabio Quartararo making it back wins by taking pole and victory.
Neil, it's going to be a shame not to see your dear mother Susan, who's been a very kind of devoted pilgrim to Jerez over the years. She won't be coming this weekend, but she's always been there at the crack of dawn with us when we've been entering the circuit and finding her space in the grandstands. I'm sure she'll be watching on TV though.
Yes, exactly. Shout out to Suze, who's currently recovering from a hip replacement at the moment, and doing well, recovering well. She'll be watching from TV, obviously. But yes, it's a great place to be. I think we've mentioned this before. Andalusia in the middle of spring is just a dreamy situation, a dreamy place. So yeah, looking forward to some good food, and looking forward to making Dave watch some Champions League football tomorrow evening, which he has promised to do. So there's no getting out of that, Dave.
Obviously, we're starting to run videos now on the Paddock Pass podcast, and Dave and I are just going to model the latest Fly t-shirts. We don't usually dress in a similar way all the time, just to let viewers and listeners know. But big thanks to Fly Racing, of course, for helping us bring the podcast to you, dear listeners, and of course to Rental Street as well. We need to bring you guys some more Rental Street interview sessions. They will be coming up throughout the year, so don't worry about that. We can be reached through any questions or any comments, whatever, through Twitter on Paddock Pass Pod, and of course, if you're listening through Patreon, then please send us any comments. We get those directly in our email as well, and we'll try to pay them some attention. The three of us will be together. Steve English sadly missing because he's been on World Superbike duty. He had plenty of interesting action to commentate on at Essen during the weekend, and now having a few days off, so well earned for Steve. But he'll be generating a podcast with Gordon Ritchie, of course, just dissecting some fascinating action in World Superbike. But the three of us will be together at Jerez this weekend, so we will be producing the note shows on Friday, Saturday and Sunday for our Patreon listeners. Head over to check those out, because basically we dissect, we look, we analyze the action that's happened that day, as well as what the riders have said in the debriefs now that Zoom has been completely abolished. So 3 cheers for that. Thank you to Dawn and all the teams for making media debriefs accessible to the media at the track, so we can really get some better content and we can analyze things a little bit better and produce some interesting editorial. That's about it, guys. Anything else to say from Portugal or Jerez? I think we pretty much wrapped everything we can on this episode.
I'd just like to say that if you find yourself wearing something that is slightly similar to David Emmett, then you probably need to go and have a word with yourself.
It's obligate. I won't be wearing a hat, Neil. Although, if Fly Racing end up sending us another box, then who knows? Anything's beyond the realms of possibilities. I've always said, actually, if I was a MotoGP rider, Dave, that I know someone says, here's an extra $500,000, you have to wear this baseball cap. Then I couldn't do it. I just cannot wear it. Baseball cap should not be in motorsport.
Hat in somewhere, a very sunny place like Jerez is a very, very good idea. It protects me against the rain at Portimao. That protects me against the sun in Jerez. But I still think that they shouldn't be. What the riders don't need is baseball cap. They need top hats, because a nice big top hat. Just think of all the sponsors you can get on there. Think of the acreage.
isn't the cowboy hat in Austin, is that enough? I mean, we don't really need to go to Gal and things, do we?
No, I mean, like, it's a good start, but I mean, I'm thinking, a nice tool, maybe sort of 8 inches or so, that would be massive. Just think about, you could get your entire, it would probably be worth a cool 20, you could probably pay for Fabio Quartararo's salary just on the sponsorship.
Dave, there's no way you could handle 8 inches, so we'll move on from that. Just a comment.
It's an idea for Silverstone, perhaps. Yeah, get the podium guys dressing up like Victorian gentlemen on the podium. They could get canes as well, monocles.
Isn't that, I'm sure, one of Loris Baz's worst memories of racing in MotoGP, when he had to do a pre-event and dress as like Louis XIV, some sort of French aristocrat. That wasn't, the most classiest of doing a pre-event media duties to fulfill. But shout out to Jason Thomas from Fly Racing. If you'd like to send Dave a new hat to cope with the harsh temperatures we'll find in Jerez, then of course, FedEx do a very prompt service, or UPS or whatever. I'm not trying to plug anybody. But anyway, enough waffle. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll be back, of course, in a couple of days next week to talk about the Grand Prix Red Bull de España.